And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are 5 cards that have never underperformed for me. So what does that mean? What that means is these are 5 cards I specifically chose that I actually play. So they fall into a few categories. They fall into the category of they are cards I have recommended before on different videos and in varying degrees. They are cards that I actually play myself, because for those who aren't aware, I don't actually play all the cards I recommend. I recommend a lot of cards that I don't actually play because I just don't have decks where they fit. These cards, however, are all cards that look very niche in what they're doing. However, I never have any issues, right? These are cards that I actually play where when they're sitting in my hand, I'm never disappointed, right? So I can call this video 5 cards that never, ever disappoint me. And I almost wish I could play them more. These are cards that I think are so good that I wish that I could play them more. And of course, they all also fall into the category of they just don't get played that much. So this is also a video where I am recommending these cards because I think they're really good and they should get played more. I'm always happy to see them, and they always overperform for me. So let's get started. Coming in first is Vanish into Memory, 2 white, blue instant. Exile target creature. You draw cards equal to the creature's power. At the beginning of your next upkeep, return that card to the battlefield under owner's control. If you do, discard cards equal to that creature's toughness. I've talked about this card before, I think on a video just talking about some of my favorite cards. Just really fun cards that I like to put in decks whenever I can. This is only in 3,700 decks. It's hardly not played at all, and I love it. And again, it's one of those cards that when you look at it, you're like, where would you use it? You almost look at it like, well, where would I play it? And a lot of people probably don't play it because they're like, well, I can't think of a great scenario where I would play this. There's so many uses for this that, again, it's never underperformed for me. It's always been a card that every single time I've cast it, I was like, wow, that worked out nicely for me. So I will give you a bunch. Okay, here's a bunch of scenarios. First of all, I'm in a blink deck, which of course white and blue does the best. And I can just blink my own creature, right? I have a creature that I want to be blinking, maybe that Cloud Blazer. And it's an expensive blink spell. 4 mana is a lot to blink your own creature, but you also get the loot. You're only going to get to loot a little bit because that's a smaller power toughness creature, but you are going to get more benefit off of it than just blinking your creature. The same can be said with any blinking spell, right? Of course, the other things you can do with any blinking spell is I can save my creature, right? My opponent's about to kill my commander. Casting a board wipe, farewell. It gets around a lot of stuff. It gets around a Cyclonic Rift, right? I'm exiling my commander and it's not coming back until my upkeep, which saves against a lot of stuff. And I also get to loot a whole bunch. I draw a bunch of cards on my upkeep, discard a bunch of stuff. Now, if your commander or whatever the creature is that you're blinking has a higher power than toughness, this gets even better because now I'm up cards because you're discarding equal to the creature's toughness. There's a whole lot of scenarios, though, where this is really incredible. If that creature doesn't come back, you don't discard anything, right? So a token creature. And if let's say I've got a generous gift in my deck because I'm playing a white-blue deck, I generous gift my opponent's creature. Now I can get that creature, I can exile that creature. So now they're losing their creature. Not only does their creature not come back, but I also don't have to discard anything. So now I just drew 3 cards. So now I've exiled my opponent's creature and also drawn 3 cards. But it gets... Again, there are the scenarios where it gets way better, where my opponent has a token copy of some really great creature that I can exile and it doesn't come back and I don't have to discard anything, right? There is also the I just saved my life scenario where I have a opponent attacking me with a Blightsteel Colossus, right? Again, just like any blink spell, this is temporary removal. Where I exile my opponent's Blightsteel Colossus, I've saved my life. Wouldn't you know it, I also get to loot a ton, draw a hole, maybe I can draw into my swords or something, right? Draw into an answer, a permanent answer for that Blightsteel Colossus, and then just, digging into your deck that deep will often get you a really great answer. You could just use it that way. You could just blink whatever the biggest creature is on the board just to dig for an answer in your deck. My favorite way to use this, that I had been playing this card for a while until I accidentally discovered a fantastic way to use this card in a commander game, which is my opponent has a +1/+1 counter deck or some sort of Hydra deck, something like that. Any of those creatures, like a lot of the Hydras that enter the battlefield, they're 0/0s, but they enter the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on them. I did this to my opponent and again, it works just like the token thing, similar but a little bit different. I exile your Hydra, draw 7 cards, and then on my upkeep, it returns to play. But of course, now its toughness is 0, so I discard nothing, and also your creature instantly dies. What a blowout that is, right? That's incredible value for a 4-mana instant speed card. So it is possible huge upside, but even just some of the fringe scenarios, right? It's a card that I'm never sad to see in my hand. That is always going to be great. It, like a lot of the cards on this list, it's one of those cards that you have to pick the right moment to use it. It might sit in your hand for a while, and it doesn't seem very great until the one situation where it seems super fantastic, and you're glad you have it in your hand. I love this card. Next up, Barrier Breach, 2 and a green instant. Exile up to 3 target enchantments and cycling 2. And this is a card that when I first saw it, I was like, hey, that seems pretty good. And I put it in decks. And then I took it out. And then I put it in decks again. I actually went back and forth on this card a little bit until I realized, because funny enough, one of the reasons why I took this out of a deck is because I sound like an idiot saying this, because it was kind of silly for me to say this, but I was like, I never cycle this. So the fact that it has cycling is meaningless. So who needs it, right? The reason I never cycle it is because I always want to be exiling enchantments, right? So the fact that this has cycling is good, but it's almost useless. The fact that the cycling is useless sort of sells the fact that how good this card is. You're never going to not want to do the exile up to 3 target enchantments. Of course, it's up to, so you can just exile 1 enchantment. 3 mana instant speed, I exile my opponent's Smothering Tithe. Is that worth it? Yep. 3 mana instant speed, I exile my opponent's Rhystic Study. Is that worth it? Yep. It's not great, but it is worth it. The exile is what really puts it over the top for me because, of course, it hits those indestructible enchantment gods, which I really, really like a lot. I mean, obviously, exiling also gets rid of the whatever that enchantment is permanently, so your opponent won't get it back, but also, it hits indestructible enchantments as well, which, of course, those gods are the ones you're probably going to see most in the Commander format. Extra good against an enchantment tribal deck, because again, the replenish won't work. It's not going to help there. If there's some enchantment you really don't want them having back, this is a case where it's going to be extra good. Instant speed, of course, extra good. This is a card that has never disappointed me. It's never, you look at this and you go, okay, even in mono green, you probably have better removal options, more versatile ones, right? And I say it all the time. Of course, I want my removal to be versatile. I don't want it to just hit enchantments. But for me, enchantments are usually the number one thing I want to get off the table in a Commander game. And there's never going to be a situation where it's not going to happen. There's never going to be a dead card. You're never going to want to cycle this. Because even if there are no enchantments currently on the battlefield, one's coming. I know one's coming. If it's not that Rhystic Study or Smothering Tithe, that really powerful enchantment, maybe No Mercy, maybe just a propaganda because I'm in a creature-heavy deck where I don't want to be paying for that. Maybe it's that Stranglehold that won't let me search my library. Maybe it's that Rest in Peace that is hosing my graveyard deck, and on and on and on to the enchantments that I really badly want to get off the battlefield. The only disappointment I've ever had with this card is I've cast it to exile 2 enchantments, and then the following turn, I have another opponent that plays an enchantment that I wanted to get off the table, and I was like, I should have waited, right? That's the only, just like with the Vanish into Memory, the only issue you're going to have with this card is when to actually pull the trigger, because I got to wait until there's 3 really good enchantments on the battlefield before I want to actually use it because I don't want it to be wasted, right? This card has never disappointed me. Next up, Crafty Cut Purse. This is seemingly a very niche card. Surprisingly, it's in 9,400 decks in EDH Rec. I'm surprised it's that high because it does seem pretty niche, but really it's not. And the reason why mostly is because the direction the format has been going. So 3 and a blue, human pirate 2/2 with flash. When Crafty Cut Purse enters the battlefield, each token that would be created under an opponent's control this turn is created under your control instead. So first off, this is, I guess it's a pirate. It's a human and a pirate, so you could put it in those themes. I don't know, do people put this in their pirate tribal decks? You certainly could. It doesn't play into the pirate theme at all. It's thematic that way. It's a great card thematically, really neat, because of course he is a cut purse, he's stealing. It has flash, which can be very relevant in a lot of different situations. If you're in a deck where you want to be playing lots of flash creatures, I would find room for this. The reason I would find room for this, if I'm in any theme that already fits it, is Again, it's a card that I'm never disappointed in. It's another one of those cards that might sit in your hand for a long, long time before you find the right moment to use it. And again, we were seeing a common theme here. When's that right moment? You might regret it because there's so many great ways to use this card. Okay, here is that great option for using my Crafty Cut Purse because my opponent just cast an Avenger of Zendikar and I'm going to steal all their plant tokens. You flash it in and you get them. And then maybe a couple turns later, you're wishing you hadn't used your Crafty Cut Purse because your opponent has a Smothering Tithe and someone just cast a wheel. And you could flash this in and get all those treasure tokens for yourself, right? Again, it's another one of those cards that there can be it's never going to be a dead card. There can be the really small play where, again, my opponent maybe is Cackling Counterpart, creating a token copy of one of their creatures, and I steal it. Remember, you're stealing here. So not only is your opponent not getting anything, but it's a double whammy, right? That's why this card is maybe even better than most people might think it is. On top of that one little play that's just good, that's a good play. It's not great, but it's good. There also is the incredible game-changing play. Again, that Smothering Tithe wheel, that could be a game-changing play where your opponent thinks, right? So that plays into it as well, where there's this moment where my opponent thinks they're just going to close things out with their Giant Avenger Zendikar and gotcha. That really nice gotcha moment is another reason why I like this card a lot. I have this in a deck. It is never underperformed. I also, there's a lot of combo potential here as well. I have Rampage with Clans in that same deck where that's a fantastic moment to actually get that play off, right? Where now I'm getting all of those, I guess you could. I mean, it gets mana intensive, but there's a lot of things like Curse of the Swine maybe where I'm creating a lot of tokens for my opponents. I mean, they're creating them, but now you get them. So it's a sort of a double whammy, right? This is a double whammy card where not only are you not getting it, but I get it as well. It's never underperformed for me. It's always been a card that I'm happy to see in my hand, and I always am glad when I cast it as well. Great card. All right, coming in at number 2, Aether Snap in a very similar theme here. 3 black sorcery. Remove all counters from all permanents and exile all tokens. And I have started putting my gameplay videos on my channel. And if you ask any of my patrons that play with me regularly, almost every single Commander game I play now, and again, I touched on this with Crafty Cut Purse, where the tokens have gotten completely out of hand in the Commander format. It's already a huge thing, but the treasure and the food and the clues, all that, and the counters as well are all over the place. And almost every single game that I play with my patrons, I say, imagine someone cast an Aether Snap right now. Just imagine. Look at all the treasure tokens. Look at all the counters on that guy's creatures. Look at the planeswalkers. All these things happening. An Aether Snap is so impactful in a Commander game. It is only in 3,600 decks right now. That's almost nothing. And the reason why, as I have pointed out, Aether Snap is so impactful and so good that it's almost hard to find room for it in a deck. I would love to put this in my Kinzu deck, and I can't because I'm actually creating tokens with my commander there. That's how good this card is. It's so good, it's almost makes itself worse because it's hard to find the deck. Where do you play it? Where's the deck that's not creating tokens, that's not doing counters? It's so popular that it's hard to find room for this card. So it sort of does itself in that way. But I would argue that it's so impactful that way that you might even want to find room for it, even if it does hurt you a little bit. Even if you do have some treasure token maker in your deck, might want to find room for this anyway, because that's how impactful it is. I used to play this card back in the day because I hated playing against Super Friends decks, and this is kill all Planeswalkers, right? Because it removes all the counters from Planeswalkers. This really is a blowout a lot of times. I was playing against a Peer and Toothy deck, one of my favorite plays I've ever had in a Commander game. My opponent had their Toothy out, and of course, they're just piling counters on it. And I don't know, it's like 15, 16 counters on it, 20 counters, I don't know how many lots. And of course, it's a leaves the battlefield trigger. So anyone who's playing their Toothy deck is thinking, there's no way I'm not drawing these cards. What could my opponents possibly do? I cast Aether Snap, and it was such a incredible blowout for them because, of course, the counters get removed, and then their Toothy has no counters on it. So all the work they've put in for nothing, they actually scooped. It was such a blow that they actually were like, okay, I'm done. They didn't think they could recover from it because they put so much work into putting counters on their Toothy, and they got nothing out of it. It is an absolute bomb in a lot of situations. Is it ever going to be a dead card? Would you ever have this in your hand in a Commander game and wish you didn't? I don't think so. Again, it feels really niche, but it is always going to be good. And again, in a lot of situations, it is an absolute bomb. It is an absolute blowout. Give it a try. Not enough people are playing this card. I might regret saying that. Coming in at number 1 for me is Stifle, a card that I've talked about on my channel a few times before, and maybe too much. I don't know. I think it's a card that deserves a little bit more love. 1 blue mana instant, counter target activated or triggered ability. That's it. And there's a lot of cards that do stuff like this. This is sort of the OG. Well, it is the OG. And arguably is the best option for it. Any of the ones that do similar things, you could make an argument for that could be played more in the Commander format. I've gotten into a few debates about it. You know, some of the things that people say I actually find shocking. I made a video a couple of years ago called Swords versus Stifle, where I compared Swords to Plowshares, the most popular removal spell in the format, to Stifle. And, you know, I'm not saying that Stifle should go in every deck, but it could, just like a Swords could go in every deck. And, you know, I got into a debate with a guy, and I'm not saying Stifle is better than Swords either, but there is a lot of situations where a Stifle will actually save your life, save the game for you, and a Swords won't do anything. And I had a guy in the comments of a video, I can't remember which one it was. I couldn't believe what he was saying. And the reason why people like Swords so much is because your opponent is always going to have their commander, which is an easy target for your Swords. I don't think it's the best target necessarily, but it is a target, I guess. So Swords is never going to be a dead card. Okay, Stifle ever going to be a dead card? It never is. Trust me. Again, the similar theme here of the cards I'm talking about. These are cards that when I see them in my hand, I'm never disappointed. I'm never sad to see them. I'm always happy. That's the kind of cards you want in your Commander deck, guys. You want the cards that when you see them in your hand, you're like, I'm glad I have that in my hand. This is never going to be a dead card. At what point in any Commander game is there not going to be an activated or triggered ability? Worst case scenario, I can target my opponent's fetch land, and it essentially becomes land removal. That's not a great way to use it. It gets used in other formats that way. In a Commander format, there's way better ways. I stifle my opponent's Craterhoof Behemoth. Again, they think they've got the game won, and for 1 blue mana, I stop it. My opponent has an Aetherflux Reservoir in play. A moment that most people, myself included, absolutely hate in a Commander game is I've got an opponent with 80 life and an Aetherflux Reservoir in play. So what am I going to do? I guess I just sitting on pins and needles waiting to see who he's going to kill. No, if I got a Stifle in my hand, I'm totally fine. It's a great feeling. Trust me, it's happened to me. It's a great feeling knowing your opponent has that Aetherflux Reservoir they can pull the trigger on whenever they want, and you can just stifle it. And now they've just paid 50 life for nothing. It's great. Really, really great. There are lots of moments like that. There's lots of those kiki-jiki moments where my opponent thinks they have the game won. And no, I'm just going to stifle that ability, and the combo stops here and there before it even begins. Most of the infinite combos in the format can be easily stopped by a Stifle. My opponent has Godo and, Helm of the Host. Stifle stops that. Just the amount of scenarios that this will save the game. It's not the best card in the world. Maybe you shouldn't put it in every deck, but you certainly could, and you will never be disappointed. I promise you, you will never be disappointed. If you're disappointed with this card being in your hand, it's probably because you're not using it correctly. You could be using it in a lot of really great situations, and you're not. And again, I don't know if there's a card in the entire format that is going to stop the game ending scenarios as much as a Stifle will. Even a counterspell won't. A Stifle saves your life in more ways than almost any card in the entire format. And you will never be disappointed if you put this in your Commander deck. It's one of the cards I recommend most on my channel. I love it. There you go. 5 cards that for me, I actually play in my Commander decks. I've actually recommended many, many times before and never underperformed for me. I love these cards. They're all great. I would play them in more decks if I could, if I could put Aether Snap in all my decks, I would. If I could put Stifle in all my decks, I would. They're all great cards, and I recommend them. So this is a combination of cards that I think should be played more in the format, personal favorites of mine, but just really fun, interesting cards. A lot of times, a lot of these are cards that you'll just get into really neat interactions that maybe you haven't seen before, and it'll end up overperforming from what you actually like. These are cards on their face that don't maybe look super great, but for me are always overperforming. And I'm never disappointed to see them in my hand in a Commander game. That is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.